This bro cannot hold his desire to unalive someone. This is the story of a 2000 psychological thriller comedy movie called American Psycho. Set in 1987 New York, the movie tells us the story of a 27-year-old rich Wall Street investment banker named Patrick Bateman, who is living a perfect life. But Patrick is hiding his dark secret from everyone. His narcissistic personality then leads him into becoming a psychopathic serial killer. The movie opens with a scene of a few gentlemen who love to spend their money for dinner at fancy restaurants and have a party in famous clubs. The scene then cuts into the next morning, where Patrick Bateman is having his very elaborate morning routine. In this scene, we know that Patrick always takes a good care of himself by having a regular diet and workout. We even get to see him as a very metrosexual man with all those cosmetic products that he has. Not just him, Patrick also wants everyone around him to look perfect. When he gets to his office, he even asks his secretary, Jean, to dress better. During the night, Patrick takes his fiancée, Evelyn, to have a fancy dinner in a fancy restaurant with a few of his colleagues. And here, we get to see that Patrick is in a very toxic relationship with them. Patrick suspects that his fiancée is having an affair with Timothy, while Patrick himself is having an affair with Evelyn's close friend, Courtney, while Courtney is engaged with Luis. During this conversation, Patrick doesn't seem to be on the same page with his colleagues, like when Patrick is talking about his concern about world hunger, they just laugh at him. Patrick's emotion also doesn't seem to be stable. One day, he gets really angry when the laundry lady couldn't clean the very suspicious red stain on his sheet that he threatens to kill her. Patrick also has no problem lying and making things up to get what he wants, like when he promises Courtney to take her to Dorsia, which is the most famous restaurant in New York. This restaurant is so famous that people have to make a reservation a couple days before. But Patrick never runs out of ideas. He decides to drug her out before the night out so that Courtney wouldn't notice that they're actually in another restaurant. The next day, Patrick brags to his colleagues that he just had dinner at Dorsia. Soon after, his workmate named Paul Allen mistakes him for someone named Marcus because it turns out that the real Marcus also wears the same glasses that Patrick wears. Patrick doesn't seem to be annoyed by it and decides to just play along. But what annoys him, though, is when they compare the design of their business card and Paul Allen happens to have the best design among them. Patrick is so annoyed that when he gets off from work, he decides to kill a homeless man that he found on his way home, even his dog too. The scene then cuts into a restaurant where Patrick and Paul are having dinner. At this point, Paul doesn't suspect anything, and he still thinks that Patrick is Marcus. Later that night, Paul Allen gets really drunk. Patrick decides to bring him into his apartment. Although Patrick is suspiciously wrapping all the furniture in the room with white sheets, Paul is too drunk to notice anything. Soon after, Patrick takes out an axe and starts brutally murdering Paul Allen. Patrick feels a little satisfied by it, but he still needs to dump his body. After that, Patrick goes into Paul's apartment to set up a scene, as if he's on a trip to London. One day, when Patrick is in his office, he gets a visit from Detective Donald Kimball. The detective comes to investigate this office since Paul Allen has gone missing. When the detective asks him some questions, Patrick just can't hide his overly nervous behavior, making him look way too suspicious. But of course, Patrick tells the detective that he doesn't know anything. After a long day, Patrick decides to pick up a street prostitute that he calls as Christy. When they get home, it turns out that Patrick has also called another woman that he calls as Sabrina. After Patrick brags about how successful he is to them, the three of them start smashing. But it seems that Patrick is way too narcissistic that he starts to flex his muscle to himself in the middle of this. Later that night, we get to see that Patrick actually has a sadistic side in bed. It shows when the girls are leaving the apartment with some bruises and wounds. The scene cuts into the next day, when Patrick and his colleagues are hanging out. Then suddenly, Luis approaches them and starts to show off his new card design. Patrick becomes very pissed at Luis since he thinks that Luis got a better card than him. Patrick begins to follow Luis into the bathroom and decides to let his psychopathic side take over. But it seems that there has been some misunderstanding in this situation. Luis thought that Patrick actually wanted him. Luis tells him that it's okay, since he wants him too. The situation becomes so awkward that Patrick decides not to murder him anymore. In the office, Detective Kimball is back again to ask some people about where they were at the day Paul was missing. Patrick is still as nervous as before, leaving the detective with no leads. Detective Kimball then asks him to have a lunch together next week so that they can discuss the case further. During the night, Patrick is enjoying himself at a club. In this place, he meets this beautiful model that tells him how Patrick might feel uncomfortable with his job, having to deal with people's money. Patrick is taken aback a bit by what she is saying, but he is still trying to be nice, since Patrick wants to bring her back to his apartment. The scene then cuts into the next day when Patrick is playing around with a suspicious-looking blonde hair that looks like it belongs to someone that he just met. When Jean comes in, Patrick quickly hides the hair. While Jean is here, Patrick decides to take her to dinner. Patrick wants her to pick the place. Jean doesn't really know what to answer, so she just said Dorsia. Patrick then picks up his telephone to make a reservation in Dorsia at 9, as if it is possible to do so. But Patrick wants them to chill first at his apartment at 7 before going to Dorsia. In Patrick's apartment, it is revealed that Patrick has been casually keeping the model's head inside his fridge. He's also planning to do the same thing with Jean by putting down some nails inside her skull. But lucky for her, when the telephone is suddenly ringing, Evelyn leaves a message to remind him that they've made a plan to have dinner with some of her friends. Since both of them feel uncomfortable, Patrick then decides to send her home before something bad happens. We might think that the phone call is the reason why Patrick decides not to murder her, but during their chat, Patrick doesn't seem to find a flaw in Jean that's gonna make him think that she deserves to die. The scene then cuts to the time when Patrick and Detective Kimball are having their lunch. The detective talks about Paul Allen, who was supposed to have dinner with Marcus on the day he was missing. Patrick always says that he doesn't remember where he was on that day. But the detective has confirmed that Marcus and a few of his friends, including Patrick, were hanging out somewhere else that day. Patrick, who has been nervous during this dinner, starts to play along by saying that he just remembered that he is indeed hanging out with Marcus and his friends. Detective Kimball then begins to talk with his ambiguously suspecting voice to conclude that maybe Paul Allen was really on a vacation in London. Later that night, Patrick feels a little bit relieved since he thinks that he can get away with Paul Allen's case. So he decides to meet up with Christy. She is hesitant at first, but Patrick offers her more money so that Christy wants to come with him. But it turns out that Patrick doesn't bring her to his apartment, but brings her to Paul Allen's apartment instead. Once again, he also has invited another woman named Elizabeth to this place. Long story short, the three of them start smashing. In the middle of this, Christy decides to sneak out of this place. But then, she is frightened to see the bed get bloody while Patrick is biting the hell out of Elizabeth. Christy starts to run away in panic that she found another dead body inside the drawer. While Christy is running for her life, Patrick screams maniacally while running with a chainsaw. When Christy is going down the stairs, Patrick aims his chainsaw and drops it right at her body. The next day, when Patrick and Evelyn are out to get some lunch, out of the blue, Patrick decides to end their relationship. Evelyn is very confused at him, since she thinks that there's nothing wrong with their relationship. Patrick then starts to casually say things like Evelyn is not really important in his life while casually drawing a woman with a chainsaw stuck on her body. Later at night, Patrick's madness has gone out of control. When he is trying to take out some cash from an ATM machine, he just feels like shooting a kitten that he found. But before doing that, there's this lady who's trying to stop him, so Patrick shoots her instead. Unfortunately for him, the gunshot was heard by some patrolling cops in the area. The cops then start chasing him. At first, Patrick thought that he could outrun the cops, but he got cornered at the end. Luckily, Patrick also got some mad shooting skill that he is able to blow up their car. Patrick begins to run in panic that he enters the wrong apartment. Since he doesn't want to leave any witnesses, he decides to shoot the security and the janitor of that apartment. After going for another run, Patrick finally made it back to his apartment. Patrick is terrified that the cops found out about what he did and has been doing. He begins to leave a message for his lawyer and confesses that he has killed many people tonight and many others before, including Paul Allen. Patrick still survives the night, but we might think that Patrick is done for. The next morning, when Patrick goes back into Paul Allen's apartment, it turns out that the apartment looks like it has just been renovated. All the bodies that he has been hiding are gone. Patrick then meets the lady who owns the place. The lady thought that Patrick is someone that had made an appointment to see the apartment, and she has no idea about Paul Allen or anything that he's talking about. Patrick rushes his way to call Jean in his office. He's saying things like he won't make it to the office this afternoon while crying and sounding very desperate, like he has been hiding something. Jean is very concerned about him. She then enters his office, hoping to find out what really happened. The scene cuts into when Patrick arrives at Harry's, the place where all his colleagues, including his lawyer, are gathered. Patrick is confused at first at why his lawyer, Harold, acts like there's nothing wrong. Harold then tells him that his joke about Patrick Bateman murdering Paul Allen was hilarious. But it is revealed that his lawyer doesn't really know him very well since he calls him Davis instead of Patrick. Patrick tries to tell Harold that the confession wasn't a joke and that he is Patrick Bateman, not Davis. Harold then says that it's impossible because he just had dinner with Paul Allen in London 10 days ago. On the other side, Jean finds out about Patrick's disturbing drawing about murdering people. This ending can be interpreted in 3 different ways. First, all the murder only happened inside Patrick's head. Second, his lawyer mistook someone else as Paul Allen since none of these people seem to really know each other. And third, Patrick lives in such high-level society that whatever he's done has been taken care of by his lawyer since he knew that he's working with an American psycho. I hope you enjoy the video. Leave a like and comment. Don't forget to subscribe for more cinema recapped.